Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose, once again. I say once again, I don't know what order these videos are going to be going out, but once again, I'm going to assume I've got my order correct, and you'll have seen me do an intro here before. I'm standing at my window because the weather's nice enough, and well, actually, it's kind of cloudy, but the weather is nice enough for me to stand here, get some natural light. Hopefully, things don't change. Also, because it's generally less likely to flicker at me, as I had an issue with a couple of weeks ago. Well, probably a couple of weeks ago by the time this comes out. I'm trying to plan and make it sound like I know what I'm doing. I don't. I really don't. But let's get into what this actual video is gonna be. Basically, I thought, because I was in a bookshop and my brain went, wouldn't that be a fun idea? I thought I'd ask a few of my friends, I say a few, four of my friends, to recommend me a book. And if it was in store, thankfully, all of them were, then I would get it and read it to see what my friends are reading. One of them did say to get a Jeremy Clarkson book, and I told him no. And instead, I picked up a genuine recommendation. I should have known better by asking him because I nearly did go into like some charity shops because that's the sort of place you probably find more Jeremy Clarkson books to see if I could find something because it would be funny for the bit. And then I realised I already have one review spot where I read bad books, and it's not exactly always fun. It's interesting, but it's not always fun. I'm not putting myself through reading Jeremy Clarkson, so instead, I got what he genuinely recommended. All of these friends have, as far as I'm aware, or as far as I was aware when I was asking, very different tastes, and that is true. I also generally went for friends who, one of whom I go to for recommendations all the time. It's actually who suggested that I read The Love Hypothesis. Obviously, a good shout. We generally have similar sort of taste. They also recommended that I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. You know the book, I'm sure. If you're watching this kind of channel, you probably know what that book is. But that's who they are. I've got a friend who, if I want some good, usually YA suggestions, I go to them. I read the first Railhead book. I read that on their recommendation because I was just looking for something new. So we got usual recommendations, something that I knew would be a little bit YA, something a little bit more fun. I've got a friend who should have known better, who made the joke, but I know what he writes, but I don't necessarily know what he reads, despite the fact he was definitely at the book club that we both went to, in the society that we were both a part of. But I don't have a good memory. So I thought I'd ask him. And finally, I've got somebody who I know what their film tastes generally are, but not necessarily what their book tastes are, despite the fact that I know, again, we both we were both in the same society. We both definitely went to that book club together, and I know he works with books, so we have that. So we have the four books here. I just wanted to range a little bit of spice because, despite the fact I know I'm meant to be reading through my bookshelf, I know that's what my goal is for this year. The goal isn't necessarily to get through everything that I have. There are like 75, 80 books that I haven't read yet. Not that I haven't read yet, that like I hadn't read at the beginning of the year. I'm not expecting to get through that many books. I mean, I probably could, were I not full time now with a job, because my last job was part time. I could read a lot more, and I know it still seems, because I'm putting out content every week, that I'm able to read loads. I'm usually reading like 2 books a week, if not more, with some of the graphic novel stuff. But when it comes down to it, a lot of the reason that I can read a lot is because I love audiobooks, and that's basically it. Sometimes I will look on, particularly on BorrowBox, if I don't feel like I'm getting through a book fast enough to hit the time where I would be filming reviews. then I usually see if they've got an audiobook available on Borrowed Box. Doesn't always work out, but also sometimes Audible has them in their like free catalog. So I'll go on there because you know I don't pay for Audible. It is an added bonus extra on my phone tariff thing. So anyway, I'm rambling, but I had that for 6 months. That's the point I was going to make at the end there. I'm rambling. I need to get on. First up, we have We'll Save the Galaxy for Food by Yahtzee Crosho. I knew the name. I hadn't heard of this book, but I knew the name because of Mogworld. I've got a few friends who have spoken about Mogworld. I've got it in my Audible wish list and just haven't picked it up yet. Maybe reading this will be the thing where I go, oh my god, I actually really love this author. I should finally read the thing that they're best known for. But let's get on to the blurb. We'll Save the Galaxy for Food. A not quite epic science fiction adventure about a down on his luck galactic pilot caught in a cross galaxy struggle for survival. Space travel isn't what it used to be. With the invention of quantum teleportation, space heroes aren't needed anymore. When one particularly unlucky ex-adventurer masquerades as a famous pilot and hated public figure, Jacques McEwen, he's sucked into an ever-deepening corporate and political intrigue. Between space pirates, adorable deadly creatures, and a missing fortune in royalties, saving the universe has never been this difficult. Absolutely sounds up my street. Also, I read that in one go and I'm very proud of myself because there are some words in there that absolutely would usually trip me up. I am feeling very proud of that. If nothing else, I read a blurb in one go. It's not going to happen again, but I did it this time. That definitely sounds really interesting. Has a kind of, I know he did do some sci-fi stuff, but it has the vibes of Terry Pratchett but sci-fi. Again, I know he did some sci-fi stuff towards the end of his writing career with is it Stephen Baxter? I know it's Baxter, but I haven't read those. I have only read his fantasy stuff. So, but that's the vibes it's giving me. Let's see if that is the overall energy I get when I actually read it. So that was recommended by the person who also told me to read a Jeremy Clarkson book. I just thought I'd give that context. Next up, we have Crying in H Mart by Michelle, I'm going to assume Zauna or Zona. I'm not 100% sure. For context, here, that is how you spell that. Hopefully, I'm in focus and you can tell. Who knows? I don't, because I don't have a viewfinder. I'm on a phone. But this was recommended to me by the person who, I'd mentioned that I know their film taste, but not necessarily their book taste as much. I'm expecting literary fiction, but it could also be commercial fiction. I'm not 100% sure. Also, how many times on this channel do I say those two phrases? Literary and commercial fiction. But I'm not sure. Let's give the little blurb a little read. It's not on the back. For God's sake. I'm fine with that. Oh, nearly just tripped myself up. I'm fine with that with hardback books because I know the deep. What the fuck is the blurb? Are you gonna tell me there's just not a blurb in here? Please. Well, apparently it's a memoir. But okay. I don't know. It is Michelle Zauner's memoir. Meaning that we've got some non-fiction in here. Very fun. But I don't know. Other than this is about her life, I don't know what it's about. Look, I'm completely aware that most people reading memoirs read them because they're interested in the person writing it. They probably have at least a passing knowledge of them before diving in. My issue with blurbs here is entirely universal. Reviews on books are fine, just make sure I can actually find out what your book is about. Otherwise, how am I supposed to know if I'll enjoy it? Next up, we have A Good Girl's Oh, I said it would happen. I thought it was going to happen with a blurb. This is just a lot of that's not sibilance, is it? I know it's alliteration, but what's the hard sound? Is it acid? How? Look, years worth of studying English literature. Still can't remember terms like that. It is what it is. Look, I never claimed to be an expert. Got 2 degrees. I'm not an expert. Anyway, we have A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This was recommended to me by the person who had also recommended Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and The Love Hypothesis. I think they've also mentioned this offhand without me asking about recommendations, because they gave 3, and this was one where I was like, oh, I've heard of that. And then I was like, I'm pretty sure I've heard of that from them. So it is what it is. They gave 3 recommendations, and because I sort of recognised that one, even if it was just from them talking about it, I went for this. Also, because it was the first one that I found. The case is closed. 5 years ago, schoolgirl Andy Bell was murdered by Sal Singh. The police know he did it. Everyone in the town knows he did it. But having grown up in the same small town that was consumed by the murder, Pippa Fitz Amobi isn't so sure. When she chooses the case as the topic for her final year project, she starts to uncover secrets that someone in town desperately wants to stay hidden. And if the real killer is still out there, how far will they go to keep Pip from the truth? Sounds interesting. Sounds fun. I think this is one of the books that, because I was looking, because when I searched it, I was trying to see if I've looked it up before or if it was one of those sorts of things, and I kept seeing the phrase TikTok made me buy it. So I think this is one of those, because I've seen that before on a couple of books where it's like, basically, if you're on Book Talk, you'll have seen this book, and I assume that they are, my friend, given the sort of thing that they recommended to me, because the Love Hypothesis, I've definitely seen that compared, not compared, I've definitely seen that label on that book, so I'm assuming that's one of the places they're finding it. I'm not on TikTok, maybe I should be, but I have enough social media outlets with my information. I don't need to give it to somebody else. Did I say A or 1 there? Doesn't matter. B, I have enough social media that saps enough of my time. I don't also need TikTok. But this definitely sounds interesting. It definitely sounds like the sort of thing I would pick up for myself. But that's not surprising. Me and this person, very similar tastes. Final book. We have Solitaire by Alice Osman. I had heard of the author. I didn't know where from. They did, I think it's called Heartstopper or something like that. Basically, I only know that because I saw on the shelf it was like it's just big round table. That was in Waterstones, so you know the kind of vibe that I'm thinking of. And on one side they had this, and on the other side they had the series. And I'm pretty sure it's Heartstopper. And so I was like, oh, I recognise this author. But I didn't know. I'd been meaning to read Heartstopper, but every time I've gone to the library and it's been there, it's been like the second or third, but it's never been the first book. And I'm like, at some point, I will reserve the first one. I will read it because it's meant to be bloody brilliant. But here we have Solitaire, Alice Osman. I don't ever remember not being serious. As far as I'm concerned, I came out of the womb spouting cynicism and wishing for rain. My name is Tori Spring. I like to sleep and I like to blog. Last year I had friends. Things were very different, I guess. But that's all over now. Now there's Solitaire and Michael Holden. I don't know what Solitaire are trying to do, and I don't care about Michael Holden. I really don't. Sounds kind of vague, but it sounds intriguing. This is definitely YA. I'm pretty sure I found it in the YA section. Pretty sure. The table was like a little bit sticking out, but I'm pretty sure it was near the YA section. I'm pretty sure that's what she writes. So that's going to be interesting. We've got a couple books that are, well, definitely one. I'm pretty sure the Holly Jackson book is also YA. We've got a memoir, we've got some non-fiction, we've got some range there, and in terms of Yahtzee Crosher, I genuinely don't know what the age demographic is that they write for, but the book still sounds bloody interesting. Like I said, it gave that kind of Terry Pratchett kind of vibes, which I love. I always find that very fun. So, next time you see me, on this video at least, I will be reviewing these books. So, enjoy! So, first up, we have Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This was, well, this was recommended to me, as it turns out, by somebody who has effectively started reading it, and then when I asked, "Hey, have you got a book that you know? I'm looking for book recommendations," they went and recommended this. Not finished it. I have read it now, and they still haven't, which I do think is quite funny. But I knew nothing about this going in beyond it being a memoir. I mean, this always sounds I know how I'm about to sound. I didn't know who this was going in, which I know makes me sound a bit like, oh, does it? Like, I don't know. It's like, oh, I didn't even know who this was, but it's a musician, as it happens. Um, Musician in Japanese Breakfast, I believe they're called. My brain just dumped out something there, and I hope it's right. Yeah, I didn't really know much about this person. Obviously, I have learned about their life through this. You know, I think that's a little unusual for me, and I think unusual for most people. If you're going to read memoir, autobiography, that kind of thing, you're probably gonna read it of somebody that you know. I think I mentioned this in my last video. Yeah, it was my last video because I was editing it all night. I am recording this part on the same day that the blind date with the book video came out. And I was editing all night last night because I don't have time management. Go through my videos and take a shot every time I say I have poor time management. Actually, don't do that. Have some water or something. But yeah, I've definitely got Drew McIntyre's, Bruce Dickinson's, Christopher Eccleston. I think I've got a couple others on here. I don't read a lot of memoir, but, you know, again, not unusual for it to be somebody that you are, in fact, interested in some form or another. Now, with this, I went in blind. I mean, partly because it doesn't have a blurb on the back. I have no problem with reviews, by the way. Like reviews being on books. You know, it's got them on the front here. That's fine. I'll have plenty of books on this shelf. Let me have a look and see if this one's got it. No, it doesn't. Of course it bloody doesn't. Any of you? Yeah, okay. So, this is my copy of Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. And, you know, you've got top half here. Well, actually, no, you're not even top half. Here's your blurb. Here's some reviews. Makes sense. Bit more review, perhaps, than you would like. Yeah, it's got it here as well with the first book. Yeah, the first part of the Cirque du Freak series. Again, here's your blurb. Here's a little, like, hey, this is by an author who's done these other things. Here's a review, not by a person I'm talking about again, because she's grim. But they could guess which children's author that is. But point I'm making is reviews are decent to have on books. They help you figure out if you might, you know, like it as well. And also sometimes it gives an idea of mood and tone, you know. Sometimes it'll, like, it's one word. So we've got, on the front of here, we have the simple short word ones of heartbreaking, will have you in tears, deeply necessary, and fascinating. I maybe should have read them more than once, because will have you in tears, 100%. I was in work, so my plan with this was to do mix and match with this and audio, just because I have 4 books to get through in a week, so I figured I'd, you know, do a little, you know, little chop it up, little swap it about. And I ended up starting it on the bus into work, do a little bit of reading, and then I listened to the rest at work because I was so engrossed. And yeah, I had a rough time. But point I'm making is, I was out the other day. I was in a bookshop and I was talking to one of my friends, who was with me, and I picked up a book off the shelf. I turned it around and immediately put it back, and they were like, "Oh, is there something like bad?" It's like, no, I'm never gonna find out what that book's about. It was a soft cover, so chances are nothing in the front, nothing in the back. Now there was another book I picked up on that day, which I did actually end up buying because it had this. It's a great concept. I will possibly share that. I might I might not. Might share that at the end of next week's video because I might read those two in a couple weeks' time. Because next week's video is going to be. Oh, well, if this week's video is learning about my friends in a way of, I learn about their interests and what they think, what they like, but also what they think I would. Next week is going to be finding out about one of my friends' interests in a way that I'm going to have to think about forever. Stay tuned for that one, I suppose. But yeah, one of those books, it's a really concept-driven cover. So to open it, you've got to open it up and go in the inside little flap. That's fine. Just give me a blurb. This book emotionally destroyed me. Now, this book it's about Michelle Zauner's life, but specifically tied to tied to her mother and the sort of relationship she had with her up until the point that her mother passed away from cancer. And it's also very much about life as an immigrant as well. She's Korean, born in Seoul, and all of her mother's side of the family is also Korean. Her father and his side of the family are all white American. So there's a lot of that featured as well. Now, for me, that hit home a lot less than the subject of grief, just because very clearly I have never had to live the life of somebody who is mixed race, somebody who is an immigrant, any of that sort of thing. That's not going to affect me. Subject of grief, I think, is going to affect everybody, right? I was listening to this at work, and there were points where I was I mean, I cried at work, middle of the day, what I was doing. I managed to not fully sob. I was holding back tears, but I was still crying, and I don't know if that makes sense, but it was happening. I was asked by somebody if I was doing okay, because I was very clearly hit by this. I was shaken, honestly. And you know what? I don't think I was doing okay. This not only, because it is hard to review memoir on autobiography in a way because it's not it's exclusively about how they've written the story of their life or the parts of their life that they're putting into this book. And Michelle Zauner is incredibly captivating as a writer. I will check to see if she was also the audiobook narrator. I didn't check. Usually I do. I usually check to see if I know who the audiobook narrator is. Because even if they're not the author or a known actor, there are a few names that I've seen over and over again. It's their job. They're voice actors, and there are people who specifically do audiobooks because they did an incredible job. Sometimes with memoir, it is captivating to hear that story told. I think stories about our life, there is something about them being heard rather than simply read. Now, I know this started as essays that then became this book, and apparently it's the anniversary of its release very soon. I think around the time that this review will be coming out, so good timing, I suppose. But where was I going with that? Yeah, this story is very. This story, no. These stories is what I meant to say. These stories are incredibly well written. She conveys, you know, conveying grief in words. I think especially that written form, so it sounds eloquent, is an incredible skill. And I know there is drafting and editing and all that kind of process, but I not even with that, even with the editing process and the drafting process and all of that stuff, not everybody could put grief into words the way she did that would hit home so much. The idea of what you wanted to say, the idea of not romanticizing the relationship, because it is easy to do that when somebody's passed away, to go, well, our relationship was perfect. But she talks about the fact that, especially through her teen years, their relationship wasn't perfect, and also that she didn't necessarily have time to begin to understand, if you will, why her mother behaved the way she did, because around the time that she was starting to understand that was when her mum got sick. And that, I think that's what hit me, because as we do reach adulthood, there are more people in our lives that are, if you will, closer to us, that we are likely to lose. Now, in your 20s, it's not necessarily likely to be a parent if you've got older parents, or if you've got parents who are generally more susceptible to being unwell, then that may happen. But in this case, her mother was generally perfectly healthy, and yet it still came, because cancer does that. But it is when you reach a certain age, and I think as you get further into your 20s, you start to realize why your loved ones work the way they do, why they treat you the way they do. And I don't mean that as them, why do they treat you badly, that kind of thing, because I know that's sort of how that sounds when you say the way somebody treats somebody. But what I mean is, there's particular ways that people communicate with you, the way they show you affection, and it's not necessarily the same as the way your friend's parents do, for instance. And she brings that up there, and that became a point of contention during her teenage years. But it's as we enter the adult world, and it's as we enter the adult world that we start to recognize the behavior of our, let's use the word parents for sake of ease, but that can be, guardians, loved ones, that kind of thing. All those strange little ways that they show us love that isn't necessarily saying I love you, kind of thing. Or it's not being doting affection, but there are these little things. People talk about love languages, and it's not even necessarily that. you know I think we start to spot it when we start doing it ourselves. I think every one of us has had that moment where you go, oh, I sound like insert relative here. I do get it a lot with my mum. I I started just doing things and behaving the way she does. And I'll use little phrases, little idioms, all that kind of thing. And I'll go, oh, I'm becoming like her. I express things the way she does. Which explains all the rambling. Sorry, Mum. Might not keep that in. Maybe I will. But the point I'm making is that reading this was so difficult because a lot of the discoveries that she was making about her mother were basically, who her mother was as a person and the way she acted, the way she behaved towards her during her time growing up as a child, as a teenager, that kind of thing. A lot of it was in retrospect, and that really broke my heart repeatedly throughout this, because until I finished it, I didn't know that my friend hadn't read it all the way through. Because I assumed if you're going to recommend a book to somebody, you're going to have read it. So I was basically messaging him throughout, being like, you woke up and chose to give me pain. Because this whole book just hit me in such a specific way. It was just, like I said, we all, at some point in our lives, deal with loss, deal with grief in some form. And this book just taps into it in a way that, it might show that I've been speaking a lot slower, a lot more controlled, because I'm just thinking about this book. It has really affected me. And I am really grateful for the recommendation, because I think sometimes seeing the way somebody else puts grief into words can really help. I'm reminded of, I was in my first year of university. I'd not that long lost my grandfather. He passed a little before I went into university, a few months before, and it was about a year or so after he'd passed. It was around the anniversary that I was sat in a writing workshop that the society I was in was putting on, and it was president of the society at the time, as it happens, was sharing a piece that he'd written to workshop. And, with the fact that the anniversary was there and the way that he spoke about it was exactly the feelings I had, which I'd never heard somebody else talk about grief like that, when he passed. When I lost my grandfather, I had this feeling of not feeling like I'm grieving. I mean, a lot of people is, I don't feel like I'm grieving right, because there is no right or wrong way to do it. But I didn't feel any emotion about it until the funeral. And sometimes I would just feel like I'm doing something wrong. And then he shared, president of the society shared this piece talking about that feeling in exactly the way that I felt, and it hit me, and I cried in the workshop. I did. Actually, I might not have cried in the workshop. I might have. No, it was in the workshop, because I was explaining that to him, that he spoke about grief in such a way that just really impacted me. And I still think it's incredible the way he did that, because it just, it is rare to see exact emotions like that, especially that are, I mean, all emotions are complex, but there's something so individual about grief. One person passes, and say there's 5 people around them, and not a single one of them feels like they're feeling that loss in the same way as anybody else, and then you read something like this and you go, no, actually, there are plenty of people that understand that. There are plenty of people who have felt like you do. And it's almost, I don't know if this is the right word, but there's something almost empowering about that. And I think it's incredible. So if you are able to, you know, deal with the emotional hurt that this book will bring, I 100% recommend it. I think for the reason of seeing grief just portrayed. I don't want to say portrayed because that makes it sound fictional and it's not, but her grief, the way she portrays it, just, I'll say that it resonated with me, and maybe it will with you too. And I, I just found that really. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know the right word to say that. Just I felt like I was with somebody in grief, and that's always helpful, I suppose, to feel like there is somebody else out there that feels the way you do. So yeah, I 100% recommend this book. And even if, like, I didn't, you're not necessarily aware of her or her band, it's still well worth it because this goes beyond her as a musician. It really does. And also, if you do, like, I've not spoken much about the way she spoke about life again as an immigrant, life being mixed race, but it almost doesn't feel right for me to talk about that just because I have no experience with it. I found it interesting to read about because, you know, learning about somebody else, the way they go through life and that kind of thing, it's very interesting. She is very eloquent in the way she talks about it. Eloquent somehow felt patronizing. That's not what I meant. But from what I can tell, she talks about it brilliantly. But like I say, it doesn't feel like it's for me to talk about. So I'll see you in the next one. Alright, so in this part, I'm actually going to be reviewing 2 books out of the 4. Finished one yesterday, finished one today. Didn't have time to film the review for the one I finished yesterday, so I figured might as well just do a little block of filming. So, first one I finished, We'll Save the Galaxy for Food by Yancey Croshaw. I don't know if I mentioned in the intro, probably, but basically I have not read anything by Yancey Croshaw before, but I absolutely knew of Mogworld. Mostly because I believe 1 or 2 people have recommended that before. Not even just to me. I've mentioned the book club I was part of, and basically that book club wasn't like we all set a book and we'll read that over the next however long, and then we come back and talk about it. Basically, there was a theme each week, and everybody around the table would recommend a book on that, and we'd sit and eat cake and have a lovely time chatting about books. And quite a few times, Mogworld had been recommended. So I knew of this author, but had not read anything thus far. This has absolutely made me want to go and read Mogworld. I don't know what it's about, but the author's style is very fun. I remember I did say in the intro that I was really reminded, or at least the idea, you know, the blurb gave me vibes of Terry Pratchett, and it is very much something that continues into the actual book. That is not just something that this feels a little bit Terry Pratchett, but maybe that's just some vibes. This very much feels like sci-fi Pratchett, and that means I bloody love it. Now, I'll be honest, I have not read a huge ton of Terry Pratchett. I am not a connoisseur. I read We Free Men when I was younger. I've read Colour of Magic. I read Good Omens, and there are a couple others. Truckers, Diggers, and Wings. I read a lot when I was younger, but you know, I've got enough of a knowledge of how his books works because I've got a lot of friends who bloody love him. Quite rightly, he was phenomenal. This just gave me that vibe. There is cynicism to it, and also very funny. I mean, that was what I was hoping for going into this, because while I didn't, like I said, I didn't fully know, there was something about when I read the blurb, I thought this is going to be some humorous, fun times. And also, you know, given who recommended it to me, I was expecting something a little bit light-hearted, a little bit fun with the person that recommended it, given that before they actually gave me a serious recommendation, they told me that I should read something by Jeremy Clarkson. I knew that I was going to be in for something fun. And I did have a fun time. This was so good. I will be definitely getting the sequel. I will be reading more by this author. I had just the best time. The main pilot, there is a moment. So yeah, this is not a spoiler, by the way. This is like the crux of the story. Basically, early on, you've got the star pilot, and he's in this huge bar, sort of space port bar restaurant kind of area. He's in a huge port, and basically what he has to do is try and lure tourists in to try to take them out on star tours, that kind of thing. And throughout the very early parts of the book, you realize that there is a figure who is roundly hated by every star pilot called Jacques McEwen. This is an author who has stolen a lot of people's old war stories and made them out to be his own. And, you know, no star pilot likes him. And then there is a point where the lead star pilot, you never actually learn his name, his real name. um, he gets hired by somebody, and she basically goes, "Look, I tried to hire this star pilot for my very, very rich boss because his son wanted to meet him. He wanted this big experience." And they're all sat at dinner, and he doesn't know what his new name is yet. And the woman who hired him introduces him as Jacques McEwen, and it's it's like the way that he describes the look on his face, if he has this like, I was smiling before, but then suddenly it was like my grin had been stapled up at the sides, because he's just there like, and that's what the rest of the novel is. He's basically sort of having to pretend to be this guy who everybody hates, and it's so funny. And the guy that hires him is the father of this irritating little rich boy. Um, I When I first saw him, I was like, immediately, I don't know what it was, but I could only think of the guy from Hot Fuzz that runs Summerfields. I'll put a picture here because I know he has a name, but it's been a while since I watched Hot Fuzz. Well, that's not true. I watched it relatively recently, but it was while I had COVID, so I was not lucid at all. So yeah, I'm also just constantly name blind. But this guy from Hot Fuzz, absolutely, those were the vibes. So whenever he appeared, this guy, Mr. Henderson, whenever he appears, I'm just, it's the only image I have in my head. And I was talking to the person who recommended this to me and mentioned that was what it is, and he's like, yeah, that's perfect. And I'm like, good. Vindication. Also, I do enjoy that the rich boy teenager is like he's not the irritating posh boy, I have my dad's money type. He's just a fucking idiot. he's very mopey, like, oh, Dad, you're embarrassing me. Typical teen stuff, but he's also never had a fully formed thought in his life, and I think that's very funny. But it's not in a charming way, because some people, they're a little bit dim, but God, it makes you endeared to them. It endears you so much. Him, no, it just makes you go, please do something. You are. It's like, because obviously, he's 16 years old, he's still a child, but there's that point where you're going, you're too old for this. You are. Because even like the particular way he is being mopey feels younger. Because generally, when teenagers are a bit like, oh, you're so embarrassing, it's usually when they're more like 13, 14, just getting into teens, everything's suddenly changing. 16, I feel, is like at a point where you're going, come on, you can you can ride a scooter at 16, can't you? Or is that 17? But, you know, you're getting to the point where you can behave as an adult can. You are slowly entering that world at 16, right? To still be the, oh, Dad, you're embarrassing me. Oh, you just don't get it. You don't get anything about me. Oh, we should not do it like that. Oh. It's so irritating. It's so punchable. I mean, honestly, my respects to Croshaw, who had to live with that character for so long. Going through the writing process and the drafting and editing process and having to live with this little bastard. Because sometimes you write a character you don't like yourself. It's hard to just live with them. They're there and they're constantly just, oh, irritating little gits. But beautifully written. This book was just joy. This brought me pure joy. And I will, like I said, 100% be seeking. I will 100% be seeking out the sequel to it and almost definitely be getting Mogworld 2. Next up, we have Solitaire by Alice Osman. I didn't really know what to expect going into this. This is possibly a little bit. See, I say a little bit younger, like demographic wise, than what I would usually go for. I think, I mean, the characters are in sixth form. I think they're about sort of 17. I think they say, I think they might be in year 13, which means they're either 17 or 18, but I'm not 100% sure about that. They might be year 12s, meaning 16, 17. I didn't do sixth form, I did college, so we just had first and second years. This does generally read more teen than young adult, even though technically you can judge by characters who it's aimed at. You're gonna generally, especially with young readers, and I mean anything before you enter the general fiction area of these are aimed at adults kind of thing. If it's young adult or younger, generally, however old the character is, you're looking at that kind of age bracket. But occasionally, this read a little bit younger. Now, what I will say is, this came out in 2014. Had I read this in 2014, I would have lost my shit because this is very fandom at times, which I wasn't expecting. And it's very. The friend who recommended this to me absolutely knew what she was doing because we both lived through the same era of fandom, this era of fandom. I'm talking directly to you. You knew exactly what you were doing when you were going to get something that references things like BBC Sherlock being the best Sherlock, mentioning Destiel and Merthyr out loud. Also, all the Harry Potter references are a bit cringe for me, but we all know why by now. Not going to talk about it. But, like, it's very. Like, there's a point where she's talking about how she's got her blog open, and there's a lot of talk about how there's blue light coming from it, and it's always that. It's always that it's a blue light, and I'm like, oh, it's about Tumblr. Oh, oh no. But I will say, accurate representation of what fangirls are like, rather than, oh, actually, not just fangirls, what fandom spaces are like, and especially were like in 2014. I don't really know what fandom spaces are like now. A, because they've mostly migrated to like TikTok and shit, and B, I'm not really interested in existing in fandom spaces anymore. I'm on Twitter, and that's hell. I made it perfectly clear that I am a huge pro wrestling fan. Pro wrestling fans on Twitter make me so sad. Because I'm like, bro, why are you still watching? And I don't mean that you shouldn't criticize what you watch, have valid criticisms of what you watch. What I do mean is sometimes it feels like you don't enjoy wrestling and yet you're continuing to watch it. But maybe I'm reading into it too much. But anyway, in terms of 2014 fandom spaces, I was most definitely a part. Now, I didn't become a Supernatural fan until I don't really watch it as much anymore. As much. I haven't watched it really since I was in sixth form myself. Point is, the phrase I am just eternally grateful that at no point during this novel was the phrase super hulock uttered, because it absolutely felt like it would be at some point. Because oh dear. It's like they're talking about Sherlock. It's like they're dressing up, and it's like, yeah, but it's got to be the BBC Sherlock because that's the best one. And it's like, oh, I'm just glad I've got H. Bomb my guy, because I think without him, I would still be a little bit like that. I still would very much believe that it's a great adaptation, even though I have read the actual story. I mean, not all of them, admittedly, but I've read a lot of the fucking Sherlock Holmes stories, and yeah, I was still like, yeah, it's great. I will never forgive whichever of Moffat or Gatiss wrote the bit with the phone charger. And yeah, I understand that it's like playing off this whole thing with pocket watches, but anyway, point is, every time it's dark and I'm struggling to get the charger in, and I'm like, don't think about it, don't think about it, don't think about it. I should actually talk about the book now, shouldn't I? This is a book full of. Now, I'm trying to say this and make it still sound like a positive, but it is a positive. This is a book full of neurodivergency and mental illness. Most of the characters, especially, the lead cast, if you will, none of them are neurotypical. Like, every single one of them's got something going on up here. And I think that's so fascinating for teenagers. And what I mean by, it's interesting for teenagers, I mean, it's so interesting to see teenagers being portrayed like that because, after all, that's the target demographic. The point is, from my point of view, again, not an expert, the way that mental illness is portrayed here is really good because, one, there is no fixing of mental health problems. In fact, it is very clearly stated, this is towards the end. I will not spoil anything, but our lead character, Tori, does say, I'm not fixed. I still want to lie in bed all day. I still have all these other issues, but I'm glad that I have somebody that is there for me while I go through that. I have a very soft spot for books that very blatantly go, no, love doesn't conquer all, you're still going to be mental ill if you have a boyfriend, kind of thing. Two, now this is going to be tricky to explain and I hope I do it well, but this is a really good portrayal of when people are not good people, kind of because of their mental health, but then they realize that that's not. Okay. You can be mentally ill, and that can make you act a certain way. Maybe you are angry with somebody, or you are quick to anger, that kind of thing, right? Now, maybe something like depression is causing that. Depression can cause you to be quick to anger, but it is a reason, but it's not necessarily an excuse to then continue that behavior. If you are aware of it, then you go, oh, okay, this thing is making me behave this way. How can I deal with it? Kind of thing. This book addresses that, not in so many words, and it is actually a bit more subtle than that, but it's basically a baby steps kind of book. And again, I think that's really fucking good, because most mental health issues, obviously meaning things like depression and anxiety, which can have steps to, maybe you're not going to ever be cured, but you can actually live a life as a neurotypical person might, whether that be that you are medicated, you've been through therapy, anything like that, right? But no matter how you do it, it's baby steps, because there's a lot of things to unlearn, and Alice Osman really, really understands that, and there's a beautiful exploration of it. And again, just it being for a younger audience is fantastic, because there is stuff that I've read aimed at younger readers, and you just go, that's so repulsive. So, I do have a soft spot for Twilight, but it's repulsive. It really is. It's toxic bullshit. But actually, I think a better explanation, a better comparison for me to make would be After by Anna Todd. You've got, in that book, you've got the whole, oh, my tragic poor little boyfriend, but I made him good because I had sex with him and we're in a relationship, so now he's magically cured of his mental illness. No more trauma because of my magic. Like, no, you can't fuck away your mental health issues. And the sorry, I'm just basically, that is my big thing with that book, is that it's so toxic with that sort of thing. And this book really just goes, yeah, no, we're not doing that, because we can't teach teenagers that, you know. The other thing that I was going to say is basically Hardin, who is the male love interest, and our sad little trauma boy. By the way, I'm not making fun of trauma. I obviously it's very serious, but this is a fictional character who's been written this way to appeal to teen. He's been written traumatized to appeal to a predominantly teenage girl audience. I believe young adult, but it's mostly going to be teenagers that are going to be reading this, quite frankly, even if it's older teens. And, he's been written to be traumatized so they can imagine making him better by loving him. It's repulsive. But the other thing, like I was saying, our little trauma boy Hardin is somebody who acts like a ball bag throughout 100% of the novel. Because, yeah, they tell you he's cured because he's got a girlfriend now, but that's not how it works. And he's an arsehole, but he's got a sad childhood, so that makes it okay. No, you are mentally unwell. Get a therapist. Actually, to be fair, he did have a therapist, as does Christian Grey, so therapy actually can work. Don't believe everything you read. Point is, you got people like that, and that kind of thing is quite prevalent in the teen and young adult genre actually is really prevalent in romance as a whole. But, it's gross enough being in books for adults who are a little more able to separate. But teenagers are going to be like way more invested, and they don't understand how the world works yet. You just don't, and you feel like you do, but you don't. You just don't when you're a teenager, and especially, you're sort of, if you're an older teenager, maybe you're just stepping into the world of love and romance and sex and all that kind of stuff. And then you're reading this and you're like, oh yeah, that's what I want. I want a little sad fucking trauma boy who's going to be a toxic, abusive arsehole towards me while I make him better by fucking him. Thankfully, this book is not that. This has been a very tangent heavy filming session, but I expect nothing less. Yeah, this book was really fucking good. I particularly do enjoy as well the exploration of things like mob justice and that kind of thing. There's one section in particular looking at, I mean, on the whole, this whole like the whole thing that the title is related to, the idea of solitaire there. I mean, that whole thing is looking at mob justice, but in particular, there's one scene at a party where there is a post made on the Solitaire blog, and it's like, yeah, this guy did something awful. Do something about it. Enact justice. And it's immediately the moral question of, yeah, he fucking did do something awful. Now, I'm keeping those sort of things. I'm keeping this very spoiler free, but like, yeah, this character did do something fucking awful, properly awful. Does he then deserve to get beaten within an inch of his life by a group of people? No, for me, because, mob justice never works and vigilante justice doesn't fucking work. But thing is, it's a really good moral quandary to raise, especially, you know, with social media becoming such a big part of our lives. I mean, this is looking at blogs, but were it published, a few years later, probably would have been used with either Twitter or TikTok, something like that. Yes, I'm aware that Twitter was a thing in 2014. I'm not an idiot, but Twitter has changed over the past few years in particular. I mean, what was it? 2018? Something like that, when there was the not safe for work ban on Tumblr. So a lot of people who were on Tumblr, even in fandom spaces, shifted over to Twitter. That changed it a lot. So, you know, which is why I say, were this published more recently, I do think that it would be Twitter or TikTok. I think I have rambled and tangented long enough. I bloody love this book. I love both of the books I've spoken about in this bit, actually. I don't know if I've made it perfectly clear. I recommend both of them. I think they're absolutely fantastic. I'll see you very soon for the final review. Okay, and now for the final part of this little video. We have A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Once again, I have discovered a wonderful book and I have good recommendations. Now, I admittedly pretty much guaranteed that I was probably going to enjoy this one just because the person who recommended it, we have a very similar vibe. Everything that I have read that they have recommended, whether it be I've read it because they recommended it, or it's been the sort of thing that I have had and they've gone, hey, I have read this book, have you? And I've gone, oh, no, but I have that in my collection. I'll check it out. It's always been the sort of thing that I'm like, yeah, I really love that. So I had Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and The Love Hypothesis. There's possibly some others. This was absolutely wonderful. It did everything that you want from a crime novel, which is basically to get you roped in, to get you, you know, hooked to the point where you're trying to think of theories alongside the main character, which I did. Was I wrong about a couple of things? Yes. Was I right about some other things? Yes. I like the sort of feeling of coming to conclusions around the same time as characters, knowing that that is, that obviously that's done on purpose. You're meant to be able to do that, but it's talent from the writer, from Holly Jackson, to guide you to the right place without being like, look, this is what's going on. Look, this is what's going on. Realize this. This is what's happening. And there are great red herrings, and there's those nice little early signs of things that you go, wait, that better come up later. Absolutely wonderful in terms of crime fiction, and something that I may consider reading more of is young adult crime fiction, especially if it's written like this, because now I do love crime fiction in general. I generally prefer detective stories. I mean, this is sort of a detective story, but I mean like actual detectives. I very much enjoy Mark Billingham, his Tom Thorne series. Well, I read 2 of those books, but I really enjoyed them, and I want to read more of them. So, you know, I like being led through a case like that. This is more sort of investigative journalism. Also, it is uh, ch- the blinds going. We had this in the last video, I'm pretty sure. Um, this is a little bit one of those things where it's like, this is a child doing something like an adult should be able to do. There's a little bit of suspension of disbelief to some extent, but point is, the reason that I generally want to read more young adult crime fiction, perhaps, is that it hits emotions well enough without ever having to rely on graphic detail. Now, that is the reason, actually, that is one of the reasons that I really enjoyed reading Mark Billingham's work, who I just mentioned, because he isn't, as well as he isn't a graphic author. That makes I'm talking about like graphic novels, but I mean, he doesn't write graphic scenes. There's a lot left implied, which I think is the right way to do crime fiction. You can sort of go, oh, this happened. And I appreciate that from young adult novels, because there is a habit with them where you have authors who are not sure how to actually write for a young adult audience. So they often try to actually write a bit younger, but it's very clear that the tone and themes. So when you're writing for children, and I mean young children, pre-teen, and I don't just mean pre-teen in the actual sense, I mean just, before they are teenagers in general, from when they start reading up to being teenagers, kind of thing, you are going to have a lot more telling you what's going on. There is not much left implied. There is, here's what's happening. There's very little subtlety, and that makes sense. For a young child, they are more in need of hand-holding and guidance with that kind of thing. And unfortunately, there is sometimes a habit within YA fiction, and I was a little nervous about that with this, especially with it being crime fiction, of guiding you too much. And, it's kind of patronizing. Young adult, isn't that based? I mean, you're meant to be what? 15 to 18? Is that young adult? I know that's technically not adult, but I feel like most young adult novels are actually aimed at older teens, maybe 16 to 19, rather than 15 to 18, but basically, older teens. And it's a case of these people are entering the beginnings of the adult world. You don't need to talk to them like they're little children. You don't need to guide them. And I really appreciated that this book didn't do that, because, you know, it's a crime book. I want some suspense. I want some mystery. And, I'm sure there are like mystery books for children. Actually, I think I have a younger readership. I think it's aimed more at either middle grade or teen. I can't remember what it's called. A Murder Most Unladylike, that's what it's called. I'm pretty sure that is a middle grade or young teen aimed at book. And there will be a little more, I imagine, guidance, a little more hand holding, a little more. When you're younger, this will feel subtle, but when you're older, you go, oh, that's that. There is going to be a bit more of that, and that's okay. I just really enjoyed that there are subtleties to this book. Now, there are some things that are a little less left to the imagination, where you're going, oh, this is kind of clear. But that is just because I have now, actually entered the adult world, rather than I'm just kind of getting towards it. As I was doing with the other books, I was sort of keeping my friend updated as I was reading. And I'm not actually going to talk about this in the spoiler section. I'm going to keep it vague, but I had a theory towards the end, and I was like, this is insane. But actually, I wasn't that far away, and I was quite pleased with that, because that is my favourite thing to do with crime books. And if you don't allow me to create theories and feel okay even when I am wrong, then that's not a crime book for me. Honestly. And even though there are red herrings, all the points that are led to at the end, all the things that are uncovered, and, here is how this crime or these crimes were committed, how, why, and all that sort of stuff. It is in the book earlier. Now, there is a little bit of this is for perhaps a slightly younger reader, and I'm not sure if it was like, yeah, this is kind of common, where there's a little bit of, oh, that's why you were doing all of this earlier. And yeah, you know what? I actually do appreciate that sometimes, because you don't often actually get that in books aimed for adults, adult novels. I've explained why I don't like using that phrase, because it makes me laugh, because I'm childish, because it sounds saucy. Ooh, an adult novel. How many times are we going to make the same joke on this channel? Who knows? Who cares? It's me. What are you going to do about it? It is what it is. When you're reading crime novels aimed at adults, you don't necessarily get a much more than maybe a passing comment on oh, and that's why they bought this from that shop. I remember that kind of being a thing in the ABC murders. When I read that, there was something tied with that, but you don't often get a long-winded explanation. You're sort of left to put the pieces together yourself, and I like that. And there's a nice balance here at the end. So with the, motive, that's explained, because you're not going to get that much throughout the rest of the novel, because you're not in depth in the perpetrator's mind, obviously. And then, the how, same sort of thing. We weren't there, so we need to know. Now, there are some little things of, during the investigation, we saw some things that could have made us go, oh, that's you. So then, you know, you get actually a little bit of explanation with that. They go, oh, that's why when I went to you, when I was here, that's why you freaked out because you thought I was onto you, kind of thing. And there's enough of that to suit somebody who is just moving into reading older fiction, but it's sort of, you know, not so much that it's patronizing. It's like, here, let me explain every little detail to you. You know, like I said, I enjoy the fact that enough is left that if you read it again, because I think that's one of the wonderful things about crime fiction is that you can read it again, and, you know, maybe not hundreds of times, unless, like, it's a phenomenal book and you can go, even though I know how it's going to end. I think for me, this is going to be something that I maybe read once or twice more, pick up on some stuff, and you go, oh, that's why that happened, this is why that happened, and here's a little clue to this, that, and the other. So, we're going to go into spoiler territory now. I will put a timestamp around here, and so that's where you can cut to, and you'll know you're in the right space because there will be a bear stealing a jet ski for about 5 to 10 seconds. Once you've hit him, after that, you're out of the spoiler zone. So, final warning, there was just the timestamp. Go and find the bear stealing a jet ski. We are now entering spoiler territory. If you want to read this book, and I do think you should, maybe skip this bit over. If you have read it, or if this doesn't seem like your thing, or if you do want to read it and maybe you just want to know how it ends anyway, continue. So, two things. One,
I'm getting the word nonce.
so yeah, that is this is a clip that I sent to my friend, the one who recommended this, because quite frankly, grim. So there's a moment earlier on which I had messaged him about. I was like, oh, I mean, I'm not going to talk about characters here, but that I'm just going to mention. Again, this is like kind of light spoiler territory, so we've got some content but not characters, but I still think this is spoiler territory. And I may end up mentioning some names later anyway because I am forgetful. And also, if I do remember names, I think that's wonderful. Actually, I was able to keep track of names pretty well in this book, and I might mention that again post spoilers. So, you know, people who aren't sticking around for this little bit are actually still gonna, you know, get to know that. But, point is, you've got. So, there are two deaths in this book, or at the very least, there's one death and there's one girl who's missing, presumed dead. Now, one of the deaths is 100% caused by this one guy, right? And the other death is kind of also caused by him. Now, the second one that's kind of caused by him is because he's a nonce. He's a dirty little nonce. And basically, he's a teacher and he hit on one of his students who's 17. Ugh, you're dirty. And I know technically it's in the UK, so he's not a nonce. Yeah, he is. He's a fucking dirty nonce, right? Anyhow, basically, I was messaging my friend early on and I was like, oh, I'm just at this bit earlier on in the book. You know, I was like, much earlier on, like maybe halfway through, I think. I was like, oh, I'm just at the point where Pippa, who is the lead character, the protagonist, one doing the project, you know, I'm just at the point where she thinks this guy is a bit noncy. And I remember at that point going, yeah, that seems right. Kind of hope it isn't, given who the character is and how close he is to Pippa. And it's just like, oh my god, that'd be so sad for so many different reasons because all the other characters that he's connected to. Because this is one of those books where everybody's connected. Everything's connected, even in the most minute ways. There's a lot of interlacing going on, and I love that. But I was like, oh, Graham, he's a bit nancy, but maybe not. Kind of hope not. And then at the end, I was like, dirty. He's fucking disgusting. I'm absolutely appalled by this man. I sent that clip, the one that I was talking earlier from Phoenix Nights. I just, oh, because it's the way he tries to justify it, where he was like, oh, but I just liked the attention. I'm like, you're in your fucking 40s, mate. At the very least, you're in your 40s, and she's 17, and also a student at the school you teach at. What is wrong with you, you dirty little bastard? Ugh. Get a grip. Now, the other spoiler, which is difficult to, because like I want to put it in spoilers. I was also almost tempted to not, because it's a sort of thing that some people do want to know, but it is a spoiler, and I understand why my friend actually didn't tell me. I mean, again, they actually, no, they said, I don't know why I said again there, but they said, you know, they forgot, and yeah, probably, but also, to be honest, even if they had just omitted that because it is a spoiler, fine. Basically, Pippa has a dog. He's a golden retriever, and that dog gets embroiled in the case effectively, and he dies. And it's fucking heartbreaking. Basically, Pippa has been receiving messages basically telling her, leave this case alone or something will happen. And she is walking her dog late one night. He is off the lead, and she stares kind of near the beginning. Oh, I knew it was too late to be walking the dog, but I just needed to get out. And then she just starts calling his name. And I was like, no, 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 no. And I'm messaging my friend going, nothing better fucking happen to this dog. If something happens to this dog, I'm going to get you. And by the way, I mean it. I'm going to fucking get you. I am trying to keep myself together here because I am one of those bitches where it's just like, yeah, no, we can talk about human death and some human crimes here, but you talk about a dog dying and it's going to hit me in a different way. I did cry at other parts of this book, but this hit me in a very particular way. You know, and she's calling after this dog in the forest, and they're looking for it, searching for it, and eventually she is at her desk, and her dad comes in, and she's like, no, 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 I don't want to read this. I don't want to read this one bit, but I've got to read it all, because if I don't read it all, I can't do a fair and proper review. So yeah. This one is for Barney the Golden Retriever. This whole review is for him. This fictional dog. This one goes out to you. So, back out of the spoiler lands. One thing that I do want to mention that I thought of while I was filming that little bit that actually isn't part of spoilers is that even me, with my awful, awful name blindness, was able to, like, keep track of who's who. And because this is a large cast of people, this is apparently something that a lot of people do in crime books. Apparently that is a sort of crime book 101, to have a large cast to keep everybody on their toes, to keep readers on their toes. But I was able to keep track of names in this, and that never happens with me. Even in books that I can keep track of, names are something that I have to that I kind of struggle to hold on to, but not here. And I think that's wonderful. So to all of my name blind besties out there, give this a little check out if it seems like your cup of tea. So that is this week's video, the recommendations from my friends. So first up, we had Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zorna. Brilliant. Made me fucking cry. Next up, we had We'll Save the Galaxy for Food by Yatsy Croshaw. Also brilliant. Made me laugh a lot. And also, I Want to Find More because I thought it was a lot of fun. Then we had Solitaire by Alice Osman. Put me in a 2014 Tumblr fandom nightmare flashback, but I bloody loved it. And finally, we had A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. Cried about some things, but honestly, I thought it was wonderful and I loved a little bit of crime to see you through the day. I think that's a good enough wrap up. I don't want to keep you here too long because I know this is going to be a long one. Next week, I'm not going into too much detail about what I'm doing for next week beyond my friend has released a book, or is releasing a book. I believe it is pre-release. I think it's on pre-order at the moment. I'll check. Make sure I've got all my details right by next week. But I'll be reading that. I hope you're all having a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you're watching this. Take good care of yourselves. Read some good books. Right.